Okay, so just like any of the other supplements, DO331 on model-based design takes the objectives tables from DO178C and adds specific objectives to these tables to deal with model-based design and development verification. So, for example, in the software development processes table, it has the typical 7 objectives that you'll find in DO178C, plus 3 extra ones that really deal with the additional elements in the specification and design model. Um, um, so additional elements that you included in these models that is not a realization of any of the high level, low level requirements or software architecture. So this kind of like, think about it as the derived requirements, within parentheses, these derived requirements of these models. Okay. So also, if you look at the verification activities, you see that one of the things that you see here specifically is the use of simulation cases to help out in the verification of the outputs of the requirements process, design process, and of course the verification process. So you see that their objectives have been added to the standard tables to deal with simulations, and I'll talk a little bit about that in the next couple of slides. Now, one thing that you don't see in this extensive list of objectives is a model coverage analysis. And do not mix this model coverage analysis up with the structural coverage analysis. Yeah, remember, in the structural coverage analysis, you checked out if all the verification cases, all the test cases that you designed based on your high and low level requirements in your software architecture, exhausted all the code and decisions and conditions within your source code. Yeah, this has nothing. This is not the model coverage analysis. And the model coverage analysis is really kind of an analysis that determines which requirements expressed by the design model were not exercised by verification based on the requirements from which the design model was developed. So the purpose of this analysis is to support the detection of unintended function in the design model where coverage of the requirements from which the model was developed has been achieved by the verification cases. So you try to check out if there's any additional functionality added in a design model that is not covered by the test cases or other verification activities that you had in mind that you designed for the requirements from which the design model was derived. And of course, if there are additional ones, you have to add extra verification based on this additional functionality. Yeah. So basically, we can break it down into 3 things. First of all, you're going to figure out, okay, what are the verification cases what verification cases have been established based on requirements from which I develop my design model, and then you're going to confirm the degree of coverage of the design model by these particular verification cases. And then if there is actually derived requirements, additional functionality that's not covered by all these test cases that you developed for the earlier requirements, then you need to add or supplement additional verification cases. Yeah? So basically, you have derived requirements within your design model for which you need to have to add verification cases, test cases, for example. And for that you can actually use all kinds of tables such as the one that's shown here, which is taken directly from DO178C. Now, possible causes for these verification deficiency are, that there are shortcomings in the requirements-based verification test cases procedures. So originally, maybe these requirements that we had from which we derived our design model, had not sufficient verification cases. Yeah? So there also may be inadequacies, shortcomings in the requirements themselves from which the design model was developed. Yeah? And then, of course, So in that case, instead you're blaming both the requirements and or the test cases based on those requirements. On the other hand, you can say, well, if I have this design model and I base this design model on these higher level requirements, then maybe the derived requirements expressed by these design models, maybe there's something up with those. And this may also include the activated functionality that you added. Things that you added temporarily in the design model for simulation purposes that's not supposed to be there for a flight operation, and that you have to deactivate. Now, so another thing that you saw in these earlier objectives is that during the verification procedures, you can use simulation procedures and simulation cases. Now, this is something that you have to be careful with. You make sure you should plan this model simulation. You have to come up with a plan to use that. And one thing you have to realize is that for specification models and design model, simulation may be used in combination with reviews and analyses of the requirements and architecture to satisfy some aspects of the models that cannot completely assessed by reviews and analyses. So you can use simulations of this, for example, the simulating model as an additional tool that helps you review and analyze the requirements that you try to capture by this particular specification or design model. So what you do see is, if you would look at the objectives tables in this particular slide, I have kind of indicated for each of these objectives if simulations are allowed to help you. For example, high-level requirements comply with the system-level requirements. Yes, in this particular case, you could use a simulation to help you out with this particular verification activity in combination, of course, with the usual reviews and analyses that you would use. Now, so you see that in this case, there are some objectives in which you can use simulation, others for which you can't. Now, in addition, that you see for design models that simulation may be used in combination with testing and coverage analysis to satisfy executable object code (EOC) verification objectives. So, basically, if you go to the EOC, the executable object code, the verification, you can actually see that you can partially use these simulations to partially help that. The key thing there is, of course, that you have to make sure that when you simulate it, if you use the simulation, there's going to be difference between running that executable object code in simulation mode rather than flight mode. And so you need to analyze what these differences really are. So key thing there is it may be used in combination with testing and coverage analysis to satisfy these verification objectives. And of course, this is always going to be just and that's what I'm indicating here, just a partial, only going to partially help you, because you always need some additional testing on the target platform that you could potentially not do with just the models that you have developed in simulation mode.